Good morning, everybody. This is Carrie Getz, and welcome to another edition of our podcast series. Today, we're lucky enough to be here with Randy Niznick, who is a Senior Director of Portfolio Management for JLL, more importantly, to me anyway. He's also a military liaison with the Infrastructure Masons. And so, Randy's going to tell us a little bit about some of the parallels between military service, working into the data center industry, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing with the Infrastructure Masons to bring vets and their spouses into the data center industry as well. So, Randy, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Carrie. First off, thank you very much for allowing me to be on this podcast. I look forward to sharing some information and some knowledge back and forth. That's for sure. So I served from 1990 to 2013 in the U.S. Navy Seabees, which is the Naval Construction Force. So I
And thank
usually
you for
get a
your
deer in the
service,
head.
too, by the way.
Thank you, Carrie, for your trust in us and protecting our freedoms. It was definitely a great career. It was very rewarding, challenging at times as well, but I wouldn't give it up for the world. I was in the U.S. Navy Seabees, the Naval Construction Force. Not a whole lot of people really still to this day understand what the Navy Seabees are all about. And I usually get a deer in the headlights look when I say I was doing construction in the Navy. Most people are like, what do you construct on a ship? Because most people still to this day just think of Navy as going to ships. So we don't go on ships necessarily. We do use the ships to go from transit from point A to point B at times, or to carry our construction equipment. But for the most part, we do not go on ships. We do construction. So my job in the Navy was I was a utilitiesman, and that was basically, I always like to say, anything that flows in pipe minus electrons. So I did plumbing, HVAC, water treatment, sewage treatment, and I also did some special programs where I got involved with physical security systems, so access control, intrusion detection, explosive detection for the U.S. State Department Diplomatic Security. I did that for my last 5 years of service. So going back to how this relates to what I do with the data center world. So I've always been on the facility infrastructure side of the data center world, not necessarily on the cabling and the rack and stack side of the data center world. I've always been on the critical for facility infrastructure side, and it actually started off way back in the early '90s. I was a chiller plant operating engineer for a critical chiller plant in London, England, and I didn't really realize it at the time that I was supporting a data center. But in the Navy, back in the day, we used to call them communications sensors. And it was, a classified environment where all of these classified communications came in and out of a naval command. And of course, it was all by computer. So you had to keep all that electronic equipment cool. So I ran a chiller plant that supported 2 floors of critical comm center in London, England, supporting the U.S. Navy. So that was kind of my first exposure into critical environments, and I was the only HVAC tech. So the Navy doesn't always necessarily think these things through, like they do in the civilian world, where you may have multiple technicians running multiple shifts to cover the data center environment. I was one of one. So for my whole 3 year tour, I was on call 24/7, 365. So that was pretty crazy. And it could be crazy at times getting those calls at 2 in the morning saying, "Hey, your chiller plant went down and the room is getting warm. We need you to come in." So that was my kind of exposure to the whole critical environments realm. And then as it goes in the military, as you proceed in rank in the, as you advance in rank in the military, you proceed from being, working on equipment to supervising and managing those who work on equipment. So at the end of my 23 years, I retired as an E7, which is a chief petty officer, which is management. And then once I got out, I did what many veterans do, and sometimes struggle with, is trying to find my home. I always knew I wanted to get into facilities management on the outside, but I didn't necessarily understand all of the soft skills, how to network myself, how to sell myself. Really, at the end of the day, it comes down to selling yourself, how to sell yourself, how to let companies know the value you bring. So my first few jobs post service were great. Right, I learned a lot. They were awesome. I would not give it up for the world. but it really wasn't what I wanted to get into. I wanted to get into facilities. So finally, I landed into getting into the outsourced business of facilities management. And my previous client, I supported their facilities, which also included some remote data center space. Now, I'll be honest, Kerry, these are not your massive tier four Facebook, Google data centers, right? But at the end of the day, it was still data center space. It still had millions of dollars worth of equipment in there that my critical cooling and my critical power supported. So, nonetheless, if we had an engineering casualty, I had to respond and make sure things got restored before it was impacted the equipment. And then my current client that I currently support now, I also manage a couple data centers for them as well. So, kind of going back to, like I said, back in the early 90s in London, England, that was my first exposure to the critical environments and just having that sense of we need to get on this. We need to make sure everything is working as it intended, so it doesn't impact the operations of a data center, the operations of vital classified communications that was happening out of that site in London, England.
Cool. So, yeah, I think for some of the folks that are listening that may be new to this industry and don't really quite understand the difference between facilities and IT and the different pieces of a data center, you can go back and listen to the first episode where we kind of break those down. But realistically, you've got the IT, which is the servers, switches, and all the stuff that passes the bits and pieces. And then you've got the critical facilities that Randy's talking about, which is the power and cooling that keeps all that stuff running and keeps it cool enough so that it can continue to run. So that's really sort of the two sides ish in the data center industry, but certainly on the critical facilities side, there's a lot of construction, there's a lot of room for trades, there's a lot of room for that. So, Randy, tell us a little bit, walk us through some of the stuff that you learned in the military that really ended up being very parallel skills to this role, and help us understand why, the infrastructure masons as a whole and this industry are really going after veterans and their spouses, and where people might see themselves in this industry a little bit.
Oh, there's a lot there. I would say first, for me, first let me just say this, and I think you understand this, Kerry, because you work a lot with veterans. Every veteran is unique. We are not cookie cutter. So every veteran, you have to talk to that specific veteran and get their specific background and their specific story to fully understand, okay, now we see your background, now we know what you could bring to the data center world. I was blessed, I was fortunate enough to work in the trades. Even before I joined the military, I worked in a tool and die plant, press stampings plant, where my stepfather was the plant maintenance director. So he taught me all about industrial electricity, three-phase power. We were running pipes, we were working on air conditioning, so he taught me all that. So I have that solid trades background that not every veteran may have. Now, in a more general sense, what veterans bring is a thirst for learning. I really have yet to meet any veteran that does not have an ABL mindset. Always be learning. They're curious. They're naturally curious, and we want to know. We don't. How can I say this? Like in a data center world, they would not walk into a data center if they're there, to repair an air conditioning unit. Most veterans, from what I've seen, and I'm the same way, I would not just walk in there keeping my eyes laser focused on fixing that air conditioning unit. Once I got that air conditioning unit fixed, I would probably end up having some small talk around the coffee pot and say, "Hey, why don't you tell me a little bit about the bigger picture of what's going on in this room?" And kind of explain what all this cabling is. That's kind of what happened to me with my previous client, where I learned all about all flash storage. I didn't know anything about all flash. I didn't know the difference between the old school spinning hard drives, which are giving off tons of heat load for cooling, and then you have your all flash storage, which is a lot more dense, but not necessarily as high of a heat load for the cooling. And I learned all about that just because I was curious. I established relationships and I asked questions. And I think 99.9% of veterans fall into that. If we don't know, we're going to ask questions. We're not shy about that. We will ask questions. And we're naturally curious. And I think in the data center world, that is what is really needed because there's so much happening in the data center world. It's, as you know, it's just ever changing. And now with COVID, oh my goodness, right? I mean, everything is going virtual. My wife and I are doing virtual doctor appointments now, where it's all through video. And I try to explain to veterans, all that data needs to go somewhere, and where it's going is a back end data center somewhere. So that natural curiosity, the thirst for knowledge and learning, and I think we also are really good at relationship management. So it kind of goes into what you spoke to, where you have, it really shouldn't be considered two sides of the house, but it is two sides of the house. You have the critical facility infrastructure that acts as back end support for all of the IT equipment that's in that data center. IT and facilities need to gel, they need to be together as one. IT needs to be letting facilities know, hey, we're going to be adding a whole mess of racks. We're going to be adding a whole mess of servers. It's going to become a lot more dense over the year 2021. How do we look for power? How do we look for cooling? Um, and that doesn't always happen, Carrie. I'm sure you see it. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes you don't know about it until all of a sudden you can't maintain cooling. And you're like, what happened? Why are we not able to maintain cooling? Oh, yeah, we forgot to tell you. We added 60 servers. Oh, that would have been nice to know.
Yeah,
um,
that's the
so
Gomer Pyle conversation of the data center. Surprise, surprise, surprise.
exactly. So I think that's it. I think that's it. And I think veterans, I think we all, again, it goes back to that thirst of knowledge and then being able to build those relationships with the IT partners. I think that's a strong benefit that veterans bring. We just have those soft skills to be able to have those conversations and develop those relationships with our IT partners on the critical facilities side of the house anyway.
I would say also, just from the veterans that I've worked with in the past, procedurally, that is one thing that kind of comes with military existence is being able to put part two after part one and part three after part two and following those orders and really doing some of that step by step stuff. And there's a lot of stuff in this industry that really is that step by step kind of, mind frame where one thing has to follow another. And it is very procedural.
For sure. Developing, MOPS, SOPs, and EOPS. I mean, that's, kind of our bread and butter. And also understanding risk, right? I don't want to turn this into an outsourced provider conversation, but I think it's important because it's happening a lot more. With your colo data centers, everything is being outsourced. So um, just being able to understand the risk to the firm that's providing that outsourced service, right? Because if something does not go right with a critical PM, and it does affect the operations of that data center. I mean, Carrie, you and I both know how that goes. The finger
Yeah.
pointing starts. And it usually starts with everybody finger pointing back to the service provider. What the heck did you do? So that's where those MOPs and those SOPs, and then understanding the risk that we're taking on, and are we willing to take on that risk? Is something that I think veterans bring to the table as well. They can really digest the risk and look at it and say, yeah, here's our risk. This is critical PM that needs to happen, and this is what our recommendations are in performing this work.
Absolutely. And I think, too, even not just the veterans, but one of the things that really impresses me with the infrastructure masons is they're not just going after, or, well, I say going after, they're not just really trying to support the veterans themselves, but also the spouses of the veterans. And if you take a spouse of a veteran, especially if the veterans had multiple deployments, they also get really good at project management and figuring out how to run a household and how to make things work and move and do all those other things that happen while somebody's deployed. And so the especially salute mission critical, that's one of the things that certainly impressed me was that they very much are working with the entire military family, not just the military person themselves.
Yeah, for sure. So, I'll be honest with you. I can't speak too much, on the military spouse side of it, just because my wife has always held the hardest job you could ever hold, and that's domestic engineer. So she's never, since we've been married, we've always, it was just kind of something. I'm not going to get into that conversation because it gets sensitive, but we've always felt one of us should be at home with our kids to bring them to raise them. So my wife is, she definitely does her work with, especially now with e-learning. So as far as, but I do understand that, you know, military spouses, and let's not forget military spouses are male and female. Let's please, I like to put that out there because a lot of times people always think military spouse and they just think female. There's a lot of male military spouses as well. They do have the resiliency, right? And I think resiliency is probably pretty darn key to the data center world. You have to have thick skin. You have to be able to think on your feet and under pressure. You have to be able to, have basically have resiliency. Again, it kind of goes back to the IT facilities thing. If something is going on and it's affecting the IT side of the house and it's causing latency, which, latency is almost an evil word with anything going on. You go to click on your app, you expect it to open right away. Um, the fingers start getting pointed, and you just have to have that tough skin to be able to work those relationships with your IT partners and say, look, we're working this, we're getting this restored. And I think just as the veteran, the military spouses have the same type of sense of urgency, being able to think on your feet, as you said, and being able to adjust fire as needed to course correct.
Yeah, course correct. There you go. That's a good one. And certainly when there is an outage, it's very loud, it's very public, it gets picked up everywhere. So tell us what you explain to your kids about what a data center is. Do they know what you do? Do
Oh,
they?
yes, a little. My oldest, so I have all, it's kind of a crazy span. I have a first grader, I have a sixth grader, and I have a high school senior. Uh, so my sixth grader is actually the mini me. So I think as it gets a little bit older, I think I'll start explaining more of what I do, and I have a strong feeling he's going to be interested. My oldest, he's already told me I don't want to do what you do, Dad. So
I don't know
um,
what it is, but I don't want to do
you
it.
know, yeah. He's like, I just know you get calls all hours of the night, and I don't really want a job like that. I'm like, okay, I get you. But I just try to explain to him, the simplest way I try to put it to him is, like I always refer to the apps on your phone. I always tell them, or even with this e-learning thing, right, with all the video, I try to tell them, those videos are just not happening on your computer. It's not all just within your computer. And I tried to explain how the cables run throughout our town and feed into each house, but then I probably lose them. But then I explained to them that when the video isn't working right or if something is slow, it has to do with that data traveling back and forth and how fast it's able to travel back and forth. I've just got to make it as simple as possible. And I just tell them we do have a data center, a Cirrus One uh, data center, not even 3 miles from my house. So I have pointed out that data center to my children and said, "There's a data center. If you ever want to know what a data center is, there is a data center." And I try to explain to them that it's just basically that's where all the stuff is being transmitted and received from. And yeah, I think my oldest pretty much understands it. He definitely knows what air conditioning is. When it gets into emergency power, maybe not so much. I mean, I have a small household emergency power generator that helps me start up when we need it. So I just tell him, just imagine this little generator like on a much larger scale.
A
And it's
whole
serving an
lot
entire
like
building. Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of, then I tell them that's kind of what I oversee. I oversee the maintenance, make sure the maintenance is being done appropriately and all that. So he is mechanically inclined, but he definitely is, he doesn't enjoy it. Like he'll help me change brakes on the car. He'll help me do stuff with the vehicles. He's curious about that type of thing, but he definitely doesn't want to do it as a career. So,
curiosity is definitely a really good trait to have in this industry as a whole. We've talked about that multiple times on this podcast that if you're not loving what you're doing, you don't have to go too far to find something else in the same industry doing something different. And it's really kind of a shame. Women in tech there's about a 67% dropout rate, and they don't just drop out of a job, they drop out of tech completely. And I think we can do a better job as a whole. And really, that's kind of part of the whole idea of this podcast series, is really to have that exposure to the different careers that are out there and different things that happen from a data center perspective, and just having people understand the multitude, I guess is probably the best way to put it, the multitude of careers that are out there doing anything from construction to that mystery thing they call cloud. And you don't just have to write code to be in the data center industry, for sure.
Yeah, I hate to tie it into facilities, but really it's the same thing that's going on in facilities management realm, right? I mean, nobody fully understands when you talk to somebody, you say, "Yeah, I'm a facility manager." Nobody fully understands what that means. So they don't understand all the different pieces and parts. It's not just the old cliche of we keep the lights on, we keep you cool in the summer and warm in the winter. There's so much more, and the data center world is just like that, right? And then you start, let's not even talk about all the organizations and certifications out there. You start talking about like Big C and what they do for the cablers and all that, and you know that's one part of it, right? You got to have the cablers, you got to have the fiber optics checks that understand that realm. Then you have, the IT side of it, like you were saying, the servers and understanding how that all works. And then you have the facility tradespeople um, that are, maintaining the critical cooling, electrical, and plumbing. And, whatever sparks your interest, or like we used to say, whatever floats your boat, there's probably in the realm of data centers, I'm sure there's a career for you. It doesn't all have to be facility infrastructure. That's what I do. That's what I love. I'm curious about the cabling. I'm curious about servers. I'm curious about the IT equipment. But could I do that for a living? I don't know. I like the big stuff, to be honest with you. I love the big chiller plants. I love the big, UPS and big generator systems. I like that kind of thing. So for me, I'm more like on the mechanical side of things. But yes, like you said, there's so many opportunities. But, let's, you know, allow me to be the elephant in the room, right? It's not for everybody. And I think, even to attract veterans, I am completely honest and transparent with veterans. Hey, a lot of veterans are getting out of the military because they're kind of tired of the 24/7 grind. And getting into the data center world, if you're overseeing a tier 4 or a tier 3 data center, it's kind of the same thing all over. It's shift work, it's 24/7, and uptime is, it's all about the uptime, as you know. So, a lot of veterans shy away from that because they're like, well, that's why I kind of got out of the military, because I didn't have a work life balance or what have you. And maybe that's a reason um, why our female counterparts are dropping out. Maybe it's because they're just not finding the time to be able to be with their significant others, with their children. Who knows, right? I'm sure there's a lot underlying that reason why there's a high dropout rate. But the tech industry is 24/7 because everybody's doing something with tech 24/7 in this crazy world we live in now. So those are the things that people need to understand. And I always say, and on my side of the world, I always say nothing ever breaks at noon on a Monday, right? So it always seems to happen, at the most inopportune time of the night. Is when you get that call and you're like, really, now this has to happen. So
Sure.
those are some of the other side of the house, right? That maybe we don't speak too much about, but it's reality.
And part of that depends on the type of facility that you're working at and how it's staffed. And not all of them are the same, for sure. If somebody's working for a data center for a company that's 8 to 5, if there's an outage at night, sometimes it might wait till in the morning. But
Right.
if somebody's working for definitely one of the bigger hyperscalers, or certainly the ones that are operating 24/7 hospital environments would be a great example. That's an all hands on deck. And so we hear about intelligent hands now with a lot of these co-location facilities, and that's really having those people that if something breaks at 2 a.m. that you can call and at least have an intelligent pair of hands on the other line, the other end of the phone line that can help you through some of this stuff. But I would absolutely agree with you that there's not a lot of jobs that you don't, even if you don't necessarily have a responsibility at the other hours of the night, you do sort of have a pride in workmanship and making sure that things stay up and running. And the data center is a massive ecosystem. To me, that's a piece that's been missing for a long time because budgets have split up amongst different departments. And so people get so busy caught up in what they're doing that they forget there's an impact on every other piece of the data center. And so that whole ecosystem thing, I think we're finally starting to see that come back now, where some of the companies with the bigger enterprise data centers are putting the budgets back under the CIO or the CTO, and it's not one department wagging the tail for the entire dog, so to speak. And all of that
Right.
interoperability is absolutely critical in this industry. I was going to say, to your point, that curiosity of the stuff around you, it matters.
For sure. Yeah, you can't work in silos, right? And sometimes you wonder if you should bring some of this stuff up, but like for me, right? So my background, I was blessed to start off in the trades, HVAC, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and then I had the added bonus of doing physical security systems. And you still see it where security is like, you're not security. Why are you concerned with my security equipment? Or hey, you're not at facilities. Why are you concerned with my HVAC equipment? And this is where, as you say, as an ecosystem, well, if we're going to truly manage this like an ecosystem, then we all need to realize we're an extension of one another, and we're all in this together. Because when the stuff hits the fan, if there's a security breach, if there's if there's a security breach, or somebody's able to manage to get into that data center and put on a device for surveillance, and nobody realized it because the security systems didn't catch it, the facilities team didn't keep that vendor under close eye, they didn't understand all of the security protocols and why they have to be stuck on that vendor like glue, because it only takes seconds to put in a surreptitious device onto something. And sorry, my diplomatic security days are coming out, but it only takes seconds for somebody
But that's
to do
part
that.
of it, for sure.
So we have to work as a team, and we have to all be cognizant of what's happening around us. And kind of going back to veterans and spouses of veterans, I think we have that natural situational awareness. So maybe that's another positive for the veterans and the veteran spouses, is we do have that natural situational awareness. We're always looking around. We're always looking for anomalies, and we understand that when we get those spidey senses going on the back of our neck, that something isn't right, and we act upon it. We don't just ignore it. But kind of got off track a little bit there. But definitely, it's an ecosystem, and everybody needs to be talking to one another. When we're doing the high risk PMs, we need to make sure that the change order is gone through, it's been approved, IT fully understands, they understand they're going to be getting all these alarms, so on and so forth. Right? It's about communication. And
Sure.
again, military is all about communication. We over communicate, as an organization. That's what we do. So, there's so much to talk about.
I've worked for companies before that set up communications for other companies that were deplorable at communications. So there's that.
Exactly.
It is a big part, though. Let's talk a little bit about the infrastructure masons specifically and the veteran liaison program. How's it going in your neck of the woods?
So I'm new. I just received my little package and my lapel pin a couple days ago. So anybody who knows me knows I got this thing about lapel pins. I love my lapel pins. So I was pretty excited about that. I know it seems simple. Everybody's like, a lapel pin? You're getting excited about a lapel pin? Well, I like my lapel pins, darn it. Um, But I actually, it was funny. It was through LinkedIn, and it was just I put out a post. Someone made a comment, and they said, and it was a veteran, and they said, "Hey, have you ever heard about infrastructure masons? Maybe you should look into them." And that's kind of what sparked my interest. And that was, I think it was maybe middle of July, maybe. And then I looked into it, and then of course I knew about Salute Mission Critical. I knew about them for a few years now, But then when I actually went into their website and I actually saw what they do, I was like, oh, they do. They actually put them into a whole training pipeline. They give them technical training, and then some of these, some of their success stories is they train them. They work for Salute Mission Critical for 2 or 3 years, and then they're getting picked up by the big dogs. They're getting picked up by Facebooks or some of these other large companies, and they're being hired on as data center technicians. So I'm like, this is awesome, right? So now see what they do, and it's awesome. It's absolutely awesome. So and then infrastructure masons, just I'm still learning as we go. I'm still learning about the infrastructure masons, but what I like about it is it's global. So it is all of us around the world addressing sustainability, addressing all of these issues around a data center. And it's not siloed into what we're doing here in the Americas. This is a global organization. So we can talk to people in all these other countries and see what they're doing, and then, try to get some consistency, if you will, on how we manage these data centers, since they are taking up so much energy and so much land and everything else that goes into that. So I'm still learning, Carrie. I'm still kind of, reaching out, networking within the Infrastructure Masons organization. Don't really have a strategic plan, if you will, for, what I would do as a military liaison, other than what I'm doing. It's kind of a caveat. So kind of backing up. So when I first came out, I've always advocated on military veterans and facility management. And I always saw that there was a perfect fit for many veterans. They could get into facilities management, have great, successful careers. But now that I've turned my focus more onto the critical environment space, which is more than just data centers, as you know, Carrie, it's laboratories, it's healthcare facilities is all critical infrastructure. Call centers is a big one. So now I'm taking that same mindset where I was advocating for veterans in FM, and I'm just kind of switching it a little bit to advocating for veterans and critical environments, and making sure they fully understand what it all entails. So I'm still learning about infrastructure masons and kind of just going about it as I go. I'm way into it for about a month now. So
Gotcha. Yeah, Lee started the whole veterans outreach at Infrastructure Masons. And for those of you that are listening that don't really understand, we've talked about Infrastructure Masons a few times, and they have a few initiatives. One is around sustainability, one is around veterans. They have another one for women in tech. They have another one for Latinx in tech. We have a Gen Z and a Gen X. And the idea is really to bring all of these diverse, thought minded people together in the industry for the good of the industry. And through the Infrastructure Masons and Salute, just like you said, I mean, this is a job for veterans and their spouses that are coming back to civilian life to get trained in the mission critical industry and get a career. And they are getting picked up by really great companies. And so I think it's an awesome way to be able to give back to those that have given so much in service for our country. And I'm married to a Navy guy myself, so I have a lot of respect for anybody in the military. So I think it's really a great program. And there's also scholarships available. So Infrastructure Masons has, out of their scholarship fund, 50% of the scholarship dollars that are earned are earmarked for women in the industry, which is great because we definitely need that diversity boost there. But the problem that we have, and I'm on the education committee too, is that we have way more money than we have people applying for the scholarships. So if you're listening and you're considering a career in tech, absolutely go out to the Infrastructure Masons website and check on the scholarships that are available and apply. It's free money if you're going to be in tech. So there's never anything wrong with a little free money, especially nowadays, when things are kind of tight.
because all we're trying to do is just open up another door. right, for the veterans to say, here's another profession that maybe nobody's spoken to you about. And here's some of the things that you can do in this profession and some of the success stories that we have within this profession, because a lot of veterans just, you know, you'll hear it all the time. I don't know what I want to do when I grow up. All they know is what they did when they were in service. And when they hang up our nation's cloth for the last time, they're kind of like, okay, that was fun. That was a great chapter in my book of life, but now I have no idea what I want to do. And that's all we're trying to do is just fill that toolbox up a little bit and say, well, if you have any interest in this, this could be a career for you.
Yeah, and that's part of what we're trying to do really with this podcast and some of the other stuff. I know there's been some great videos that have come out, so definitely, if taps, I think it's a mixed bag of tricks. It kind of depends on what they have on their plate. And sometimes, maybe that pushback is that they don't really have anything scheduled to get people in. But we certainly have videos and brochures that we share with the taps, and feel free to reach out to them or to us. Well, Randy, we're getting pretty close to our time here. So if you wanted to leave some people with some parting words, what what would you uh, what would you say?
So, all my sisters and brothers who are getting ready to, and I will say, I always refer to it as a career transformation, not a transition. I just believe the word transformation more accurately reflects what you are going to go through when you move from the military life into corporate America. So as you go through that transformation, I'll just put out some things here that I found to be very important. You have to know yourself outside of the uniform. You have to look at your whole life and look at what is the common denominator throughout your whole life and what you've enjoyed doing, and that'll kind of help you to figure out what it is you want to do after serving in the military. Work on
Perfect.
personal branding. Personal branding is so important. So personal branding is nothing new. Personal branding has been around forever, but the reason I believe it's become in the limelight over the last few years now is because of our digital footprint. So, unlike in the years past, where you would meet people by physically going out and shaking hands and having conversations, literally, people can find you, they can see a post, and they can literally look on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, all within a matter of minutes. And they have an idea of who you are. If that does not match, if you are putting off one type of brand on your LinkedIn professional profile, but I look at your Instagram and your Twitter and your Facebook and I see something completely different, that is going to be a detractor. It's going to be a detractor to a hiring manager. It's going to be a detractor to an organization because they're going to wonder, is this somebody we really want to bring into this organization? So I'll get off my high horse about personal branding and making sure your digital footprint all aligns. But I always say you have to make sure that you are the same person across all social media platforms. I mean, granted, there's a little bit of difference, right? LinkedIn is professional, Facebook is personal, but you have to make sure that you're, because at the end of the day, in today's day and age, you might never even meet your hiring manager. One of the previous jobs I had, it was all virtual. I had a virtual job interview. I never met my boss face to face. It was all virtual. So, what are you putting off in your virtual realm? And is it who you want? Is the perception what you want to be? So, I'll leave it at that. And then my door is always open. So, you can find me on LinkedIn for any of my brothers and sisters that are getting ready to go through their career transformation. Any questions? I am not an expert. Nobody's an expert. Nobody's a ninja. Nobody has this down to a science. But I can definitely share some of the trials and tribulations that I went through when I first came out of service. After 23 years, I had a bit of an ego on my shoulder that my wife, love her to death. She was the first one that broke it off in my backside and said, "Randy, you need to get that. You need to get it off your shoulders, man." People are seeing it and it's not attractive. You need to get the ego off your shoulder. And of course, I was like, but I was a chief in the Navy. I was a chief in the Navy. So, Carrie, I know you mentioned your husband was in the Navy. I'm not sure what he made it to, but just tell him, hey, I talked to a Navy chief. And he'll probably be like, oh, yeah, Navy chief, man. But we kind of have this reputation. So, and I just, honestly, I thought my crap didn't stink, right? And I quickly learned that out here in corporate America, it's you have to really know how to sell your skills, and it's not easy to do. So,
And I tell people that too, that I mentor all the time, just to keep a running list of accomplishments, because one, you're going to need to recall those when you're asking for a raise, or you're on job interviews, or other times. And plus, if you're just having a really down day, sometimes it's nice to be able to glance through those and realize some of the things that you've accomplished. But 3 years from now, you'll absolutely forget those. I'm terrible at past dates. I'm one of those people that if it happened in the past, it happened in the past. I couldn't tell you what year it happened in, other than my kid being born, I think. But that's about it. So
yeah.
I think all of
Yeah,
those are
it's
excellent points.
yeah, it's interesting you say that, right? So we have this thing in the military. I don't know, maybe your husband even has one. We call it my "I love me" wall. It's kind of the inside joke, right? It's my "I love me" wall. We put up all our awards that we received in the military, and some people will say, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that. And I felt kind of the same way you have, Carrie. Like I like to have some of that stuff posted, right? Because those were life accomplishments that I'm proud of. So why not hang them up in my home office? So when I have those days where I get down on myself, and my wife is like, what the heck is wrong with you, Randy? You worked for diplomatic security, running operations out of Washington D.C. You're seriously going to let this little problem bother you right now? Sometimes I look up and I see those awards I got from the Department of State, and I say, you know what? You're darn right. Why the heck am I letting this? Why am I letting this get to me? So I think it's important sometimes to have those visuals to remember our backgrounds and remember those past successes.
Absolutely. And to your other point, digital presence and making sure that you conduct yourself professionally. And I see this all the time. I've seen, especially now, because I think social media has
Right.
made it so easy to be just a pissy individual, that people say the most horrible things that I don't believe that for any reason, I don't believe they would say to somebody's face. But it's really easy to throw it out in a tweet or something like that. And I do think that companies look at that. And I also think that people going to work for a company really look at company culture, and they look to see what the makeup of the board is, and they look to see what they're doing from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, especially if they're a woman. So, and again, from a veteran point of view, vets refer other vets. It's I mean, this is a close knit industry, but the military and respect for military people amongst other military people is also a very, very strong bond. And I think company culture has a lot to do with somebody's personal satisfaction in a role and professional satisfaction in a role.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because somewhere along the line in your digital footprint, your company name is going to be in there somewhere, either on your LinkedIn profile or somewhere. It's going to be linked to an organization. So you hit the nail on the head. I mean, again, it's an organization is going to be like, is this the type of person we would want? Because if somebody finds this person and they're going to see how they act on Facebook, and then they're going to see that they work for our organization, um, it's just not cool. It's not cool. So you have to be smart, and it's tricky in today's day and age. So just keep it professional. That's all you can
Absolutely.
do. Think. It's just like back in the day with emails when we first started emailing. How many times you would write an emotional email before taking that 10-second breath and saying, "Do I really want to put this in an email right now?" So
Exactly.
I wish people would say, we still do that due diligence before we send an email out. Why are we not doing that same due diligence when we do a social media post? Why? Why? Because we stress that on the email side of the house all the time. Never send an email if you're emotional, because you're going to say you're going to write something that you may not necessarily mean, or
Well,
it'll
and
be
even worried
misstated.
about the tone of your words in an email if it's going to be taken the wrong way. But people don't seem to do that when they tweet. And I think that it's really kind of horrible that some of these people are out there, including people in tech, that just say such venomous things. You know,
Yeah,
if it's your opinion, it's your opinion, but I think that it doesn't belong in professional platforms.
I
But
agree.
that's my 2 cents. My 2 cents. Anyway, well, Randy, I definitely want to thank you for your time today, and I will make sure that there's a link to Randy's LinkedIn profile in the podcast description. For those of you that are riding in your car and not seeing that, though, his last name is Niznick. So feel free to look him up. And of course, you're also welcome to connect to me. And Infrastructure Masons is imasons.org for those of you that want information about the veteran placement program there that is headed by Lee Kirby at Salute Mission Critical. So, Randy, thanks again for joining us. And for the rest of you listening, we look forward to having you on another edition of the podcast series.
Thanks, Gary.